Hello, friends. After curve types, let's talk a little bit about how you can control curves. Let's look at what tools are needed in Rhinoceros to control curves and the logic of the work. Let's start if you are ready.
Before we focus on how we can create networking curves, there's one more thing I want to cover, which is about the direction of the curves, which kind of concerns the tangent information of the curves. So to see the direction of the curve, or the tangents, we can type up shortcut of direction. Therefore, we can see the direction of the tangency on curve as white arrows. And you can see that as I'm moving along this curve, there's an arrow that kind of rotates right. So this is essentially like driving on the road. So how do we steer the wheel to move the car around? So essentially this direction as I'm moving along the curve gives me the tangent curve direction for this curve. If you want to create curves that actually meet at a point, now to do that we are actually going to first look into how we can manipulate some of the geometry of the curves themselves. So I'm going to first select one of these curves, move it around. So if I want to turn the points on, these are the control vertices. You remember now I can simply select these in groups. Move them using the gumball. The gumball is located here at the bottom, so you can actually move them around or move them individually. You can also move them in this way in a singular fashion. That's one way of changing the existing information. But let's say we want to add more curvature. So right now we're doing a twist to the right, and say we want to twist to the left as well. To do that, I can input or increase the information along the curve at any location.
If want, go to the Cascade Point Edit option. And under this, you can see multiple point edit tools. So if I want to insert the control point, I can click on that one and then select the curve I want to change. And you can see that as I'm moving along this curve, it's also moving along the interpolating points data. So if I want to input another point here, it's showing me weight. The weight is located in terms of the control point locations, right? So if I want to put, let's say, one more point here, now that actually constrains the topology a bit more, right? So I'm going to do that again and place one more point here by adding more points. We can actually have more control over the curve. So a quick tip, all modeling curves will be essentially starting with a simply curve and adding more control points. As we go, we can, for instance, now move it towards the left, and now I have two movements. One towards the left and one towards the right, as much as adding control points. We can also subtract them, so I can bring more control points by selecting the curve. And then the point here are going to remove. It will be highlighted, so if I click on that, it will be removed. And if I want to, let's say change or control the topology using handles using the tangency information, we can also use it with the handlebar editor. So click on the handlebar, click on any location along the curve. Let's say I want to change the topology here. It will give me a handle, and by moving this handle around or changing the magnitude of it, I can also control the curve geometry at that location. We can also insert knots and insert kinks. Now the first thing about kink is keep in mind that kinks create a discontinuity on the curve. So if I want to create a breaking point on this curve, I can insert the kink. Kinks actually would break the curve into two. If, for instance, I type up exploded, this curve cannot be exploded into segments because it's a third degree curve, whereas if I add a kink at any location and then I explode a curve, now you would get two curves separated at the location of that kink. A kink could be used for other things as well. For instance, let's say I have a curve like this and I add a kink at this location. Now if I visualize the points, that kink will be located on the curve itself. But if we moved it around, you can see that it creates a point of discontinuity. So although these curves are interpolating through these control vertices, this kink has a deviation of 0. So when I'm moving towards that point, my tangency information actually becomes discontinuous. So that's something you have to keep in mind. Now for knots. I'm going to move towards the previous curve which we used. If you remember that, you can also visualize the knots that are located on the curve itself. And I can also manipulate the information for the knots. If I want to insert another knot, I can place more points on this curve, and then they will be redistributed based on the topology of the curve. Now I can have more control points and more knots on this curve. That kind of constrain it any way I want. And we can also remove knots from the curve like that. And one last thing I want to mention is the weight and the control point weight. That is something that we actually use for controlling how much we want to control vertex to influence the topology of the curve if I select the curve it points on and go to the point weight. Let's say I want to change or override the weight of this control point. I can pull the curve towards that control point a bit more, or release the curve. So that will also create some sort of a soft modeling editing option for the curve. So that's essentially how those are the fundamentals of controlling the topology of the curves. So you can find them under the point edit options. Thank you all for watching.